So I've got three aspects to this question. The first one I want to look at is, what do you think is entailed in effective cybersecurity leadership? The second aspect of the question is, how do you engage stakeholders to promote cybersecurity objectives? And the final one is, what metrics do you have that indicate you're getting traction with your plans and ideas? Maryam, I'm going to start with you because I interviewed each of these panelists before today and asked them some questions and perspectives. Maryam told me she's got a 3-year budget for cybersecurity and a CEO who sits down and has helped her create a cyber strategy for the business. People out in this room will probably be envious of that success, Maryam. So tell us a bit, how did you happen? How did you get that level of engagement?
Thanks, Peter. And look, I think it's quite an interesting time for us at AGL because, like many of you, I have been developing a strategy for many years for different organizations, working with the CIOs, with the technology team, with the CISOs to develop strategy, their roadmap, their op model. It has always been a technology-led initiatives. It had always been the prerogative of the CIO or the CISO to develop their strategy for cyber for the next year, or maybe sometimes even 3 years, but it hasn't stayed at that level. And with everything that was happening in Australia last year and the major breaches that we have had, and just the change of pace in critical industry and energy sector especially, I had a heart-to-heart moment with our executive team and said, look, we just really have to sit back and just take a look at our landscape, take a look at all the regulatory burden that are coming our way, the really heightened threat landscapes, the attackers that are really knocking at our door every other day, and just agree once and for all, what's our risk appetite? How much are we ready to accept as risk? How much we want to value the business, and where do we want to go?
Maryam, I've got to come in there because you gave me a term that you repeatedly use, and this is a Maryam term. So what is the term that you expressed with your stakeholders?
So I'll get to the term in a second, but I think it came true when the executive or CEO was asking me that, Maryam, you are asking us to spend this amount of money, unprecedented for us, for the next 3 years. And you're just showing me that the risk goes a little bit lower. What's that about? And I said, look, we are just going to be, this is where you can say at the end of the 3 year that you are in a defensible risk position. And that's what we can all aim for, that we can show that we have been having a clear and holistic and transparent view of our risk to the business, and we have had a plan to go and address it. And I cannot promise that we are not going to get breached. That's no CISO that is worth a while can give that promise, but I can at least help you to be in a defensible position that if that happened, we have done our due diligence, we have done all the right things. And so that's a term, defensible risk plan. So defensible plan for our cyber risk. And I think that the beauty of this model is that you really get the exec to have a part to play in defining the cyber strategy. They own it as well as much as I do. They have their name on it. And we have, obviously it has been led by the cyber team and the knowledge that you bring to the table, but they have had their input into it. And so it's a lot more than just what cyber does. It's a lot about the responsibility of different parts of the business as well, and that concept of co-ownership of risk, and the concept of really moving from so much of a cyber guard and to more of a value driver and business enabler, and how we can achieve that. Because I think you get a little bit of more that business language when you get those people in the room and develop it together.
Let me bring Anna in on that, because Anna, you said to me when we were in the film, you stressed the executive drives the leadership, you said, but you said actually you've got a more influencer role that you've got with these people. You've got to get them to understand the risks in their organization and where action needs to be. And you said something that intrigued me. You said it is important executives understand how the cyber threat landscape works. And you said that bit often gets missed. Could you explain a bit about your thinking there?
So I think a couple of things on that. I mean, yes, the executive must lead and have to be engaged and have to understand enough. But I think I also made the point that you also need multiple levels of leadership, and particularly with cybersecurity, you need to find the right ways to get that in there. But in terms of the threat landscape, I do feel it is vital they understand, again, enough to know why this is a never-ending game at the moment, right? You know, we're not going to get $3 million, our budget's fairly small, and suddenly be at the position where we don't have to really worry anymore. You know, it's just this ever-changing landscape. So I do try to, you know, every audit risk committee and every time I get a chance to with the Vice Chancellor is to say, you know, things change, they are changing, and it's not just the threat landscape changes, but our environment changes all the time. And the regulatory landscape, but our IT environment, you're going through major change internally. So with all of these moving goalposts and all of these sort of variables, I think it's important to understand that the way we can be exploited, the way that can be attacked, keeps being dynamic.
And you said something to me that I think would resonate with a lot of people here, and that is your executive leadership are extremely supportive of what you do. You were very complimentary, but you said try getting 2 hours of their time to sort of sit down and explain what we've got to do to address this challenge. That's the hard bit in some ways of that.
Yeah, and I think the catch is, yes, they're supportive. And luckily, you know, we have a chancellor who's from the banking sector and really pushes the agenda, but what they really want is just enough confidence in the team, you know what you're doing, but they don't really want to give you much of their time. And you know, it's a real balance. They have so many demands on their time. So it's like, how much time can I really ask of them? Is it more important than the other issues that they're dealing with? So sort of try to work it in sneaky ways sometimes, but also to the point of maybe I'll have an hour a year directly with them. There's reporting to the Audit Risk Committee every quarter, but you know, you don't get much time at all with the governance levels. Chief Operating Officer is different. I have quite frequent engagements with them, but you know, the universities almost quite different organizations. The whole academic and research side, you know, we're trying to engage directly with faculties or particular research groups or just the privileged users. Students are kind of a whole nother world out there as well, and you can engage in certain ways. And then there's the corporate body, you know, the more traditional, the finance, the IT, the HR, the properties, you sort of engage with them in their leadership in a slightly different way as well. But overall, absolutely, it's critical we have a very supportive Audit and Risk Committee, very supportive Vice Chancellor in the sense of they just expect us to be getting on and doing stuff.
Okay.
And they want enough assurance that we're doing enough.
Tony, we spoke about governance as a trigger point for sort of how that relationship you had in terms of leadership, whether you had a problem on your hand or not. KordaMentha exists because organizations probably haven't been good at governance in some ways. So are there some parallels here about the governance of a business and how cybersecurity needs to be governed?
There are. It's interesting because the organisations who approach us wanting to do things such as a cybersecurity risk assessment are already infinitely ahead of many other organisations that haven't even taken that step yet. So at least they're aware that they might have a problem. But the experience that we have in relation to governance and restructuring and insolvency and so like will typically illustrate that there are governance failures that lead the organisation to having to deal with our teams who manage those sorts of circumstances. And cybersecurity is very, very similar because we know that when we look at cyber breaches and we do a lot of incident response, there is a lack of governance or there's a lack of accountability or there's a lack of defined roles and responsibilities and who's clear. And this will often lead organisations into some really awful situations if those risk eventualities occur. We work with organisations to try to coach them into dealing with a crisis. To Maryam's point, it's impossible to solve this. This is a wicked problem. We're never going to be able to solve it, and we can throw all the money in the world at it, and we're still going to have a problem at the end of the day. And it's not okay, but it's okay in the sense that we accept as cyber professionals that this is the world we live in. We can't be across everything. But to have organisations ready for when these things occur and have them match fit, so to speak, so that when a crisis does happen, they're not exchanging business cards, which is often the case when you've got breaches occurring and you've got you've got clients and customers who are sort of beating down at your door wanting to know answers, and you can't give them an answer because you don't know what's been taken. We've seen this in breach after breach. We've seen breaches where a company's come out and issued a press release saying we don't believe the hackers have gotten access to any sensitive information, and a week later we believe the hackers have gotten access to a limited amount of sensitive information, and then a couple of days later we get the inevitable press release that says, well, they've got everything, right?
Yeah.
So,
go on, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in there with regards to governance, because that's actually it gets interesting when an incident actually happens, right? And then the level that the risk gets accepted. That's, I think, a very important part, because a lot of times the risk at the organization get accepted not at the right level, right? We have had situations that technology team accepted the risk. We knew we had problems, but did the business owner actually was across that? And it came to the light when we had like a near miss incident or like a major finding is in one of the various red teamings and things that we do. And then you're just like, the business comes, like, why didn't you fix it? So you didn't give us budget, and we signed it off because we didn't have the budget. And so it's therefore then it has to come to that level that actually the business owner knows what risk they have accepted and what risk they're sitting on, right? And a lot of times they don't, and it's kind of a known fact. And sometimes it's really funny because everybody, like 500 people across technology, know we have a problem, but we haven't fixed it. But nobody kind of told that really senior person or the CEO even that we have this risk, we are sitting on it, and we are just, because we don't have budget and we cannot make an investment and we have so many other holes to fill to fix. So I think that governance becomes really important in terms of acceptance of the risk at the right level, and that clear view of where are the risks across the different business units, because different business units have also different priorities, so might even have different risk appetites.
Let me bring in Anna. I think you wanted to say something in there.
Just to support that, really, that a lot of this is around risk leadership as well. And you need an organization that is prepared to think that way. They can't think that I'm looking after their risk for them. And increasingly, we as a cyber team are trying to sort of educate that actually, we're not making that decision for you. We are trying to explain and articulate the risk in a way that you can understand, and getting it to the right people. But even getting that right person, someone to say, yes, that's me, is really hard. And I think that's the level where we're at and sort of struggling with it.
And we were speaking beforehand about how you see that actually it's data that we're protecting in organizations. And you said really that gets to how we classify data and how getting the behavior changes in organizations, whereas this public facing, is this highly sensitive? That's the biggest challenge in some ways for you in getting that data ownership of.
In some areas, and the role of the data steward. So there's a classification, and then there's, what role in terms of the risk aspect is that data steward able to play, and do they have the skills and the awareness to be able to do that effectively, or are they just saying yes without really understanding what they're saying yes to?
Because Maryam said something to me also that my interest, that you're calling 2024 the year of purging data, which I thought was an interesting. I hadn't heard anyone say that they're devoting resource, and it's being done by the business, not by the cyber team, which I thought was also very interesting. Following on from Anna's point there about how data is in many ways the crown jewels of organizations, how did you get people to sort of purge all the data?
Yeah, look, I think that was like a continuation of the work that we had about making business really own the risk as well. And as you said, like we kind of jointly with the GMs of that business unit went to the board and asked for more money to go and just purge data. And it was actually FY23, so it's actually ending almost. And we have done a lot of work. I mean, the work continues always, but and it was about just because as a cybersecurity, we cannot have visibility across everything, and a lot of these things is the business and data custodians and the data owners that know where are all the skeletons are hidden, and just go and fix it. So we did a major program. I know actually that other organizations have done that as well. Obviously we do see that, and I think it was one of the speakers earlier mentioned that we think that we are only saving data for a certain amount of times. Like lots of times we are holding on to the PII data a lot longer than necessary. And so it was a lot about just kind of cleaning up the environment. And I think it's just, again, the continuation of that risk ownership and just taking ownership that if a cyber incident happens, actually you as the leader of that business unit, you have that much responsibility because you accepted the risk and you had that visibility about, yes, maybe some cyber control failed, but also have you been across that you cannot say, oh, I didn't know that we had this problem.
And you're also using the sort of the punitive stuff from the legislation, the fines, the penalties, so people's awareness that do we really want to hold on to the PII data for more than 5, 6, 7 years? You know?
Look, I use everything in all the methods in my arsenal, be it legislation, be it red teaming, be it incidents that are happening. I think you have to just use all those things to your advantage to push that.
Tony wants to say something, sorry.
So on the weekend, the council cleanup happened in my street, and I ended up throwing a whole bunch of stuff out. But I also didn't throw out a whole bunch of stuff that one day might be useful. Right? Does this make sense? So I'm going to talk about this in the sense of data, because if you look at statistics around your average data usage in an organisation, 15% of data is actually being used and is business relevant. About 35% is rot, redundant, obsolete, trivial. 50% is unknown. The business has absolutely no idea what it is, right? And it could be someone's hooked up their phones and synced it to their laptops, which has then gone into a cloud backup, which is then, who knows what that is, right? So that presents two things. It presents a risk, right? It's a business risk and a cyber risk. It also prevents a cost overhead because the business is having to maintain, manage, store, employ people, employ tools and the like to manage this 85% of information it does not need, and it's a risk, right? And the reason why I talked about my council cleanup is because we as human beings inherently don't like throwing things out, and companies don't like throwing information out because I might need to keep it. There might be some marketing, insights there that we might be able to derive out of people who, moved 20 years ago, right? And as a result, it's very unintuitive to go off and press the delete button. But from a risk perspective, it is absolutely critical. And we were talking about this just a moment ago, just before the panel, around how important this is as a risk management tool. And when we talk cyber, we talk about data minimization. And for a lot of organizations, but how's that related to cyber? It is, very much so.
And what you said to me, Tony, is go and look at your garage and see how much of that really should be thrown out and how much you're keeping.
Yep.
Tony, you also were talking beforehand, and this was sort of music to my ears, and given what I'm doing currently in Adapt, about the need to take a product focus with what's a life cycle management focus to the systems, because things keep evolving and changing. It's not we buy something and leave it. We've got to have a stewardship from that. Could you elaborate your thinking there?
Yeah, the analogy I often use is you can go and buy a really amazing brand new car today, it doesn't matter what brand. And if you're not servicing it in 6 and 12 months, in about 3 years' time, it's not going to drive particularly well, right? And it's the same with cybersecurity. Things change, they change very frequently. Last week, there was a bug that almost ended up its way into every Linux distribution that would have put a backdoor into every single Linux server on the planet, which would have been exploited by it's believed to be a state-sponsored cyber criminal that did that, right? So you've got to be across these things constantly, and it's the price, what is it, that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, the price of cybersecurity is eternal vigilance, unfortunately. And this is where we were also talking just a little bit earlier around just the burnout in this sector, because we are constantly having to be across different areas, different things. People make mistakes. Sometimes, we have a digital forensics team who go in there and investigate crimes where an insider has gone and done things, right? So we're protecting against bad people externally. We're protecting against bad people internally sometimes. We're protecting against mistakes by good people internally, right? It is very, very difficult to manage. And you've got to accept that, but you've also got to be ready for when things kind of hit the fan, so to speak, and make sure that you've got the people, process and tech controls at that point in time to be able to deal with a good incident. And I noticed a couple of airlines were here today. If you look at, on the weekend, there was an issue with Boeing, one of their jets You know, the cowling came off. You had a Boeing plane where the thing sort of left, the emergency hatch left not long ago. But those planes ended up making the ground and no one dying because there was really good people and process managing those crises, and the technology was there to make sure that you know, the plane could get back on the ground. And we need to be thinking more like that in cyber.
I want to come and delve in that a bit later on, but Anna, I want to bring you in because we were talking about controls, and you said it's important to establish the controls as the foundation of that arrangement. And then you also alluded to the fact of actually it's the controls that might slow the people down, the more technicals that can cause you some issues. Can you talk about the sort of controls that you're sort of establishing and some of those challenges with technical controls which can be seen as a handbrake on the work of, I'm thinking, developers and people like that?
It's a hard one to know where to start, really. I mean, we're trying to put better secure ways of working in, just as, you know, we're focusing on the IT area right now because that's a very challenging area, but across the whole organization. But I think it's the part of the discussion I try to have is that this is not security just telling you have to do this and you're not doing it as a favor to us. You know, this is now your job. You know, what used to be okay 3 years ago even, in terms of how you did privileged access management or whatever, or how you ran this little team over here, is no longer okay because of the cyber threat landscape. It's not my fault. You know, so it's just fact, it's reality. So we're not asking, you have to start behaving and you have to start owning this problem.
But you were, sorry, Anna, but you were talking to me about tailored messaging, you were saying, and I thought that was an interesting turn of phrase.
So I think where you do need to change behaviour in particular, you absolutely need that tailored approach. And it will be very different whether it's dealing with executive assistants to a team, or, you know, trying to harden all the people with privileged access. How do you really get them to feel it is a privilege and to behave properly around that? And how do you, what's that message also then to the executive assistants who might be doing the multi-factor authentication for their boss, you know, and how do we then get the right controls in there and measure that? So you definitely need the tailored messaging in addition to the general awareness and messaging. But the controls are something, you know, you don't always want to talk about it as a control. I think it's just, this is what we'd like you to do, or how we'd like you to behave.
You had a phrase that I thought was interesting worth sharing, which was, cybersecurity gives the business their license to operate, but it's not the main thing. So can you elaborate a bit more there?
Where to start? Look, I think it's like many organizations, cybersecurity is a byproduct of one of the foundational services that the organization has to have. We are not a tech company, and we are not also maybe FSI, which has more of a cyber like building or like part of their messaging. So for us, it's just a license to operate. We are running critical infrastructure that is providing critical energy to all Australians, and it's the livelihood of a lot of people, and our nation and our state basically depends on it running. So we have a mandate to secure it, and if we don't have it, we wouldn't have a license.
But then we had a discussion about prioritization based on that, and you said basically that comes back to the strategy of the organization. You've got to link the two and always relate those sort of two. And there's something else that you introduced to me, the term of the Business Information Security Officer, the BISO, which was a new term for me. So I'm intrigued in why you, that issue about how you got that role established in the organization, but also that issue of prioritization. So if you could sort of talk about those things.
Look, BISO term is actually not new at all. Like most of the organizations already have it, especially in FSI. I think for us it's new because, again, building that strategy and concept of co-ownership of the risk with the business, we really just want to shift our role as of cyber as well, and as Anna mentioned as well, really go to that model that they understand the risk and they sit really close to them, to the business, and that's the role of the Business Information Security Officer, that is a cyber person that gets dedicated to a business unit, that gets embedded into that business unit and has the KPIs as part of the roles to bring down the risk of that business unit, right? So together with someone from the, a champion from the business, so they will have shared KPIs on risk reduction. And it's all about, again, it goes back to the concept of the different business unit priorities to make sure that we are fitting the lock to the bike. That's another thing I like to say. So we're making sure that we are putting the risk that is appropriate for that business unit and what they are doing. We are a very diverse landscape. Lots of major organizations are. We have very different types of business units that have different priorities and different systems that they are running. And so we cannot just have kind of cookie cutter approach across everything. So you have to.
But that's getting back to Anna's point about tailoring the message to the right.
And tailoring the controls even to some extent. I like the phrase that Anna said that it's not my fault. Because sometimes I do have to say, like, it's not my fault. Time has changed, and this is now like a mandate, and it's because of the time you have to do it. And like another phrase I'm using is like technology hygiene controls. Instead of just calling it cyber control, it's not cyber controls, it's technology hygiene.
Yeah, you're getting ahead of me because I want to get to the metrics and I want to come back to that one, but I'm going to start with Tony on the metrics question. And you talked a lot to me about that, this idea of the aviation industry in the 1930s, planes dropping out the sky, now it's the safest form of transportation, and there's lessons to learn from that. And part of that was the importance of doing post-mortems on cybersecurity incidents with people. So, and I think you made the point, the worst time to respond is in a crisis. Have the game plan ready beforehand.
Yeah, completely. And we've seen the success of that in other areas. And I recall being on a plane once and I was sitting next to a pilot having a conversation. We had a pleasant conversation around cybersecurity and aviation, and she mentioned to me, and I was talking about the fact that aviation is an area that we can learn a lot from, and she said it's interesting because the medical industry are now talking to us around how they can potentially avoid accidents in surgery, to understand how they're approaching things, and so clearly it's an area that just because of that safety being a number one priority mantra has taken risk management to that level. The beauty of aviation is that if you look at any incidents, there are typically multiple cascading failures that need to occur for a serious incident to occur. In the world of cybersecurity, often just need one issue for there to be some really significant problems. So building that security in depth model for organisations, which is often difficult because it's hard enough to get budget just to get a single line of defence sometimes. When you say in organisations, well, we need a little bit more, we need to be able to segregate and put in role-based or rule-based, whatever access control you're doing, it gets a little bit more challenging. But I did want to impart with the audience here is that security in depth and having a goal from a risk appetite perspective is absolutely essential, and that needs to come from a senior leadership, which is what we're talking about here. It needs to come from a board level. To Maryam's point around having business operations and different business units may sometimes have different risk appetites. That's absolutely the case. It depends on the information they're holding, the sensitivity they're holding. And as people in cybersecurity, it often comes down to educating these folks around, okay, well, you're keeping all this information, which may not seem all that critical to you, but we know as cyber professionals that it really commands lots of money on the dark web, and people are not, the people that are perpetrating these crimes are not, they're not against you, it's not personal, but they just want something that they can make money from, and you have it. It's as simple as that. And in the olden days, you had people who used to put balaclavas on and go rob a bank. These people are now the ones online doing this stuff, and this is what you're up against, all right?
Okay, I want to talk about, sorry, Tony, I want to give Maryam to talk about, you were talking about the metrics, the dashboards that you think, and I've had some feedback, that's hard, metrics are hard because they're subjective things in organisation. Two different stakeholders, two different KPIs, what's important to one isn't important for another. Can you talk about the metrics that you've established?
Look, 100%, first of all, just want to agree that metrics are very hard. But I think we have been as security professionals, we have been a lot of the times victim of, I don't have all the information, so I cannot provide a metrics, right? My approach is always, something better than nothing, and you have to start somewhere. And the 80% rule, just as much as, because a lot of times, I cannot provide you metrics of our coverage because I don't have visibility of everything I have. I would just say, just put the metrics there, and we'll put the caveats and just say that it's a work in progress. As we have the visibility, the metrics might just actually go backward, even though we are increasing our coverage. So those things are there. I would just encourage everyone to just really push it hard. That I understand that you might not have the best data, but just start with the data that you have, and then enrich it and progress from there, because we have to have a line in the sand, and the fact that you do not have a data from something is a data itself. All right, so I think I have in my current dashboard areas that I have grayed out and say we are actually working on getting you the data for those things, because we don't have it and we are rolling that out. But just want to make sure that you understand that we are having zero visibility type thing. That's by itself is the data point. And the way I have organized that is, look, because I want to push toward very much a business owner accountability and ownership, having that business unit a specific risk, and it's very English language, like your risk of I'm not going to mention them, like I have 5, and you can already imagine what they are, and you give them a rating of what's their business unit risk for each of those areas, and they would just really understand it, and you can understand that not everything can be moved that much there, because the risk cannot be moved that easily, but then you have the supporting metrics to those high level things that can be moved, and we are working on it. So it gives that both the executive level metrics, as well as that little bit more detail on the back of that these are the objectives, and this is all the money that you're paying for is working toward improving those metrics.
Anna, you talked to me about also the importance of thinking of metrics not just in hard numbers, but actually human behavior. And the conversation you said, people in shops asking you about open APIs was a sort of indication to you that your message is getting across.
Well, that wasn't my message. That was really just a fallout from one of the very public attacks that suddenly people who wouldn't ever have talked to me about cybersecurity ever in my local chicken shop were suddenly saying, they had an open API. It was like, but that, that is raising awareness generally. But certainly, at the university, that general publicity has helped increase awareness. But yeah, for us internally, I think there's metrics, there's measurements, there's things that we gauge. We're certainly trying to build up the harder metrics. But I think, layers of defense critical. And, my colleague here, Graham, has been spending years building up those layers so we know that every crown jewel, what I want to know is, do our crown jewels have as many layers of defense around them as it's possible to have in our environment? And, that's one thing I look at, and then I can talk about that to the leadership.
But you also spoke to me about rehearsing your response, and the sense of having a playbook in place, because you spoke about an inevitability of being the victim of an attack. It's good fortune you may be not, but sometime it could be your turn.
Yeah.
So what was the thought there?
Well, I guess there are metrics. Do you have a incident response playbook? Yes. Sorry, plan. Do you have the playbooks? Do you exercise? All of them are individual metrics. But I guess it has to come together of, how do you pull all that together? How do you test it? So that then becomes that next metric of, you do a red team, or you do a pen test, or you do a tabletop, and you see what falls out of that. So each one just builds on the other. But I think the metrics sometimes standalone can be pretty meaningless if you don't use it, or if you don't know that will be suited to sort of certain different situations.
Okay, we've got a minute left, so it's a quick 20 seconds each. What gives you hope? So, Maryam, what gives you hope as a cybersecurity executive?
Look, I'm very positive about the AI, and I think that we have a lot of problem in security, that we have too much data and not enough information. I'm hoping that AI could help elevate some of that problem for all the CISOs.
All right, what gives you hope, Tony?
I think it's the legal and the regulatory focus on this as a problem, which is helping boards, senior management, people who may not be technologically savvy understand that there are repercussions to this, and that they need to be across it from a director's duties, business judgment, and confidence perspective.
And Anna, what gives you hope?
For me, I guess building on what they've said, but for me, really, it's my team. And their passion, their enthusiasm, the fact that they really want to make a difference. And also I know that, others across the university really want that as well. So even though it's difficult, I know that people are trying. And at the end of the day, that's, I think, what my hope is based on.